Amen. You may be seated. Hey, my name is Mark Devaney. I am the senior pastor of this group of people called Cornerstone Church. And we are so glad that you are here today, especially because we're finishing a series called All That Matters. And if you were here last week, then it's especially important that you're here because I left you hanging on a couple things. And I want to help you see some next steps that you can take to actually live a life as though Christ is all that matters. Because as we see in the scriptures, He really is. So thanks for being here. I have one housekeeping item real quick. So if you have this little piece of paper, it's not really bulletin, but I guess that's what we call it. The middle announcement speaks of the Ecuador mission trip interest meeting. And here's what you need to know. All the information on that thing is correct, except for the meeting is on February the 9th, not February the 2nd. And that meeting got changed, and I failed to let them know before they printed this. And so it's my fault. So I need you to fix it right there for me. So February 2nd. Now here's the other, or it's February 9th, not the 2nd. Here's the other thing I want you to know. If you are interested in going on a mission trip this year, this is a great one for you. And here's why. Number one, Ecuador is an incredibly beautiful place. That's one. Two, you're going to stay just at a hotel, which it's no crazy accommodations, which I know scares some people. But the last thing is you're going to eat some really great food. They really take care of you there. So you're going to get to serve people who are, some of them aren't following Jesus yet, but some of them are, and they're very young in their faith, and you're going to get a chance to pour into them and see what Gary and Dina Pate do across that country, and it is incredible. You will love being a part of that trip. So if you can make it on February 9th to that interest meeting, it would be well worth your time. That trip is happening in October of this year, so you got a little bit of time to plan for it. So that's my housekeeping item. I'm so glad. Now, the other thing as we get started in this, I'm curious if you're like me, you kind of notice people. So in the last service, we had this guy, and he was wearing one of those Kansas City Chiefs jerseys. Oh, wait, we got a guy back there in a shirt. He's not wearing the jersey, but you know people sometimes are fans of something, or as I would also like to say, fanatics for some of them, because maybe they get all dressed up. I mean, I'm a Duke basketball fan, even though they lost twice this week, which was super disappointing. But you see, I mean, people are painting their faces in these stadiums, and I mean, it's just crazy stuff. But you know that they're fans because of that. The other way, you also know people are fans because of how they talk. Right? And so there's this group of people, and I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're Ohio State fans. Do you know any Ohio State fans? They are some of the most obnoxious and rude fans I've ever met in my entire life, okay? So, but you know that, and I hear it all the time from the Ohio State fans, but you know who they are based upon how they talk about their team. And you know whether or not they're a big fan or a small fan, or if they just mention in passing, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of crazy. There's other things that you notice about people really is, like with my kids. Like I know where my kids have been because, they leave like this breadcrumb trail where they're going, or goldfish crumb trail, or wrappers of snacks and stuff that they've eaten all over the place, and they've been there. All that kind of stuff. There's two groups of people that I'm going to pick on for a minute. And if this is you, just don't take too much offense to this. It's all in lighthearted, good fun. But the one group of people is the CrossFit community. I don't know if you've seen CrossFit people, but if you're in the CrossFit community, like you feel this obligation to let everybody know that you're a CrossFitter. I did. I actually was in CrossFit several years ago, and I wanted everybody to know that someone with this kind of a physique could actually be a part of the CrossFit community, whether they wanted me or not. But I was a part, and you would throw that out there in the conversation, be like, yeah, I was at the CrossFit box, and this was the WOD, which is the workout of the day, and you would let people know that's who you were. So that's one group of people. They talk about CrossFit all the time. Then there's this other group, and you know who you are. I call them the essential oilers. Do you know people that are like this? And I'm not knocking. Listen, I have a diffuser in my office. I have some oils in my desk drawer. So, hey, I'm speaking as one of you at this point. And I actually have the Focus blend that I rub on my wrist from time to time when I really get distracted. I need to put it on there. But, essential oilers, like you're in a conversation with them and they're telling you, hey, you know what? There's an oil that I would recommend that you start using for this particular thing and whatever it is. And they throw it out there. You know who they are, right? And so That's just people you know, and they're great people. They're wonderful people. My wife's one of them. We have a whole cabinet in our bathroom, and you open up those bottom doors, and there's essential oil, these little bottles. I mean, half of them are empty, but they're just all over the place in the bottom of that cabinet. And she'll tell one or two of us, she's like, hey, would you go to this cabinet in the bathroom and pick out some oil so that we can put them in the I mean, we're diffusing stuff all the time at our house. So anyway, you know who you are. Now, here's the thing, and why I tell you that story. We all, as followers of Jesus, we should be letting people know who we are based upon how we live our life and how we speak with other people. In fact, I believe that's really what Paul gets to in Colossians chapter 3. So last week, as we were looking at Colossians chapter 3, we were told about all of these things that we really needed to deal with in our life. There was, sexual immorality and greed and anger and rage and lust and, dirty language and, all these things that really characterize who we were before we came to know Jesus. Which, by the way, a lot of us have forgotten that that's who we were. And so Paul's telling us all these things. We left that hanging there last week just for us to feel the weight of that, for us to deal with who we used to be. And these things, as even Paul wrote in that particular text in Colossians 3, he says, these things are lurking really in the shadows of your heart. They're still there, and you need to deal with them, and you need to be ready to know that at any moment you may wake up tomorrow and one of those things comes to the surface, and you're going to wonder, where in the world did that come from? And the truth of it is, it came from just deep within inside you. And maybe it's something that you've never really dealt with, but you needed to deal with. And so he talks through Colossians 3, and he's writing those types of things. And then he gets to this place right in between last week and this week. There's this verse in Colossians 3:10, and it's really where we've started with the question for this series. And the question that Matt started with a couple of weeks ago is just simply this: what would it mean for us if we all lived as though Christ is all that matters? And really what we mean by asking this question is, hey, what would your life look like? What would your interaction with other people look like if you decided to live your life as though Christ is all that matters? How would you approach your job differently? How would you approach your neighbor differently? How would you approach your coworkers differently, or your fellow students differently if you're in school? How would you approach the person that you interact with at the gas station or the local restaurant or your favorite place that you go? Like, how does that impact your life if you were to choose to live your life as though Christ is all that matters? And what Paul's really getting at in this is to say, if you were to choose to live your life as though Christ is all that matters, then your life is going to look not like this old version of you who you used to be before you met Jesus, but your life is going to look like this new version of who you're supposed to be as you're being transformed by Jesus. And that's where Paul's at. So if you have a copy of God's Word, turn to Colossians chapter 3. And in Colossians chapter 3, we're going to pick up today in verse 10. We've actually been, especially in verse 11, every week for this series, because that's really the center of all of this. But Colossians 3, beginning in verse 10, talks about this new nature. And so he tells us very specifically, he says, you should put on your new nature. So he knows that there's this battle that's taking place in our life. You should put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn. And I love the way that he describes this. As you learn to know your Creator and to become like Him. Did you know that God's greatest desire for you is that you would be transformed into the image of His Son? God's greatest desire for you is not only that you would just get to know Him, but also that you truly would become like Jesus. Not because you're a Savior, but because you are learning to live life like Jesus lived, and you are learning to treat others the way that Jesus treated others, and you are learning that you can make a difference and have an impact in this world just simply by following Him and following His model for how you should live your life. So as you get to know Him, you should be becoming like Him. Now he goes on, he says, in this new life, as he goes to this next verse, in this new life, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if you are a Jew or a Gentile. It doesn't matter if you're circumcised or uncircumcised. It doesn't matter if you're barbaric, uncivilized, slave, or free. And what he's doing in all of this is he's helping all of us know, in this particular context, it does not matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your heritage was. It doesn't matter what your upbringing is. It doesn't matter what your race is. It doesn't matter where your status. Nothing of that matters to us in this conversation. He is going, no, Christ is all that matters, and he lives in all of us. It completely levels the playing field for every one of us to know. Number one, man, we are all a mess. If you were to look around this room and you were to hear some of the stories about some of the people that are in this room, you would be shocked, right? But the truth of it is, we're all a mess. None of us is that far removed from the stuff that happens in people's lives. And what Paul is trying to help us to understand is, so often what we try to do is we try to prop ourselves up and make ourselves look better than we really are. And he's just trying to get down to the heart of the matter. It's Christ. It's Jesus. And he lives, every one of us that chooses to believe in and follow Jesus, Christ lives in us. He walks with us. He empowers us. He equips us. He's not going to leave us alone. He doesn't leave us as orphans. He is right there, and it's true. Even when, guess what, you mess up. Even when you don't get it right. Even when you're not perfect. Even when you sin. Even when you fail miserably, he's still there. He doesn't choose to say, you know what, I'm done. I'm finished. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. No. When Christ is all that matters and he lives in you, man, it changes everything about you. So much so, I want you to look at this, what Paul wrote, 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And some of you are familiar with what he says, but picking up in verse 17 and then verses 20 and 21, he picks up on this new creature. And he says this: this means that anyone who belongs to Christ, so if you choose to believe in and follow Jesus, you've become a new person. The old life is gone. The old life is gone. So this old way of life, this old way that you used to be, the old things that used to define you, right? They're no longer there. They no longer define you. Now, the truth of it is, the sin that's in there, it still lurks in the background, and sometimes it likes to rear its ugly head so that it shows up, and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? And it's just because it's still there, and it's also because this new life, as he describes it here, this new life has begun, but it hasn't, overcome everything yet. Right? So you have this new life, and while most of us, we get to this place and we want it to happen right away, and we want this change and transformation. It's like, hey, I saw somebody come to faith in Christ, and I want their life to be completely different today. And it's like, no, it might take 35 years before they begin to see that there's some changes that they should make in that, because it's a slow process. It's a slow process, but the truth of it is God is doing a work in you. And so this new life has started in you, and it will continue in you, but it's going to take this thing called time, which becomes really, really challenging for us. But now, you're a new creature. Old things are passed away. New things have come. And he goes on. So verse 20, he skips ahead and he says this: we are, and so speaking of us, those of us who have chosen to believe in and follow Jesus, we are his ambassadors, is the way that he describes it. God is making his appeal through us. So through your life, through your conversations, through your story, through the way that you are living in this world, God is making an appeal through you. And he's making that appeal through you into the lives of the people that you come in contact with on a regular basis. And he says this: we speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. Why? Because he is speaking through you, through your story. And so you are his ambassador. God is making his appeal through you. Come back to God is the way that we are pleading with people. We're pleading with them. So he goes on, right? And this is just a great reminder, verse 21. For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sins, so that we could be made right with God through Christ. And the reason that I wanted to show you this verse is just because I wanted to serve as a reminder that there's not any one of us in this room that is able to be made right with God apart from Jesus. There's not anybody in this room that can do a good enough job, that can say, behave well enough, or live a good enough life, or give enough. Made right with God based upon the things you do. Every one of us needs Jesus. And not only do we need Jesus, but can I just remind you that there is a whole world out there who needs Jesus. They don't need us to come with judgment. They need us to bring Jesus. They need us to show up just like it said. As you know your Creator and you have become like Him, you are different and you are bringing a different conversation into that relationship. Because here's the truth of it for every one of us. Jesus Christ was the offering for us. None of us can be made right apart from Him. So now, if you take that and you go back now to Colossians 3, verse 12. Since God chose you, and that's those of us who have chosen to believe in and follow Jesus, He chose you to be the holy people that He loves. You must, and here's where we're going today, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. So the picture that Paul begins to write in this, it's so clear. Earlier, he was talking about these things that we need to remove from our life. The sexual immorality, the lust, the greed, the idolatry, and the anger and rage and malice, those things, those lists that we talked about last week. And it's really as if we are making a decision to remove those, as if they are an article of clothing is actually the description that he's using. And so we are to take these things off, as if you have these shirts on, and one might be sexual immorality, you remove that, and anger, and you remove that, and rage, and anger, and lust. You're removing all of those things. But then now he gets to this place when you come to this understanding that Christ is all that matters and that He lives in all of us, that you should be living life differently. He says this, now you need to clothe yourself with these things. And so you are taking those articles of clothing, you are putting on tender-hearted mercy, and you are putting on kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. That's the decision that you are making. But he's not finished, right? It's not just those 5 things. We're going to talk about those in just a minute. But he goes on, right? He says, make allowances for each other's faults. Okay, so let me just throw this out there. Free totally for coming today. But if you can just do this one thing in your marriage, it will completely revolutionize it. If you will get to the place where you will make allowances for each other's faults. And why is this so important? And I know husbands and wives, and you're elbow in and you think it's funny. But the truth of it is this. So often we forget that we're not perfect either. And we want the other person to be perfect. And we don't realize our own shortcomings. And so we don't make allowances for any of their faults or any of their failures. And what Paul is saying is going, no. If you will, and if it would start with your marriage and then flow over to your kids and flow out into your community, what a difference it would make in the church and the influence the church can have if we can say, you know what, we're going to make allowances for one another's faults. It's okay. Because there's times that you're going to fail and there's times that I'm going to fail because there's not any one of us that's perfect. And then he goes on. And, by the way, you need to forgive anyone who offends you. To which most of us would say, yes, but Paul, you don't know what this person did. And Paul reminds us, it's okay. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive other people. And you're like, yeah, I guess that's true. Forgiveness. Making allowances for each other's faults, you begin to understand how incredibly difficult this is, but yet how incredibly important it is. He's not finished. And above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. Now, here's the deal. I can't sing a lick. I make sure my microphone's off. I control it. I don't turn it on until after the music's done so that hopefully you guys never have to hear me sing because it would probably drive you out of the building. I can't play an instrument. I took like 1 year of piano lessons, and I think the teacher probably said, hey, you know what? You probably should find some other things to do with your life. This isn't for you. And so I don't understand all of this stuff, but here's what I understand. This gifted group of musicians that was up here today, and they did an incredible job, but if they all came up on this stage and they all decided to play the song that they themselves wanted to play on their own, and so you got, that one playing one song and this guy playing another song and they're playing another song back there, it would give us all a headache, wouldn't it? But when they come together and they've got this little thing going in their ear that's keeping them on the same beat and the same pace and all that stuff with that music, and then those singers come in and they're singing exactly where they're supposed to be singing and exactly what they're supposed to sing. I mean, it really comes together, and it shows us this picture of perfect harmony. It shows us this picture of what it looks like when people will come together. And I know some of you are still going to complain that it's too loud, but that's okay. But the truth of it is, that's what we are supposed to do when he says, hey, listen, and by the way, if you will make the decision after all of those things to choose to love people, one another, to choose to love the people that you will come in contact with, the people that you work with, the people that you open the door for, the people you're going to say, well, I don't really know them. But that's not an excuse. You just say, if you will decide that you are going to put on this article of clothing, that means that you're going to make the decision to love people even when they don't look like you, talk like you, think like you, or act like you. That you're going to make a decision that you are going to love them. It will begin to draw us together in this beautiful picture called harmony. And then he goes on. He's not finished. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts. And the way that I see this as I read through the scriptures is that, listen, as you come to this place and this understanding that Jesus really is the one who holds all things together, that God is the sovereign God of the universe. And as I was actually in a conversation this week telling someone, like, I believe that everything in our life either comes from or flows through the hand of God, meaning that he could have stopped it, but for whatever reason, he chose not to. I believe that, yes, God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And while I don't understand it, I believe it. And because I believe it, it allows the peace that comes from Christ to rule in my heart. I don't get it right all the time. There's still days that I worry, and there's still days that I'm frustrated and all that kind of stuff. But then I come back to, and I'm reminded that this is true. This is true. When Christ is all that matters, and I am letting him rule and reign as he should, and I'm letting go of control, I can have peace in my heart, and I can say, you know what, this is his, it's not mine. It's his to worry about, it's not mine to worry about. It's his to deal with, it's not mine to deal with. So I can only do what I can do. He goes on, for as members of one body, you are called to live in peace. And oh, by the way, he throws this on there, and always be thankful. There's something about a thankful heart. There's something about us getting to this place where we can be reminded of all of the many, many gifts that we have. He goes on, let the message about Christ, remember what we talked about 2 Corinthians 5:20, when he says, you know, he made Christ who knew no sin to become the offering for our sin. This is what he's talking, the message about Christ in all its richness. The message about Christ that, you know what? He chose to lay down his life for you. He chose to go to the cross for you. He chose to be buried for you. He rose again, and the same power that rose Jesus from the dead is now living inside of you, ready to empower you and equip you and enable you to do that which he is calling you to do. So let that message about Christ in all its richness, in all its glory, let it fill your life. Let it overflow. Let it flow through you into the lives of the people that you are come in contact with. Teach and counsel each other with all the wisdom that he gives. And he goes on, right? Gets a little bit weird sometimes. Sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts. It's one of the reasons that we do what we do on Sundays. Because it reminds us, as we sing these songs and as we focus on those words, we are reminded of who he is, and we are reminded of the message of Christ in all its richness and what it means for us and what it means and how we should live our life. And then he closes this particular part, and this is where it really gets challenging. And whatever you do or say, whatever you do or say, there's no exception, is there? It's not, hey, whatever you do and say on Sundays, or hey, whatever you do or say on the weekends. No. He's just throwing it out there completely. Listen, whenever you are living your life, however you are living your life, whatever you do in your life, when you go to work, this should be true. When you come home from work and you're with your family, this should be true. When you're interacting with the person at the gas station, you're pumping gas, this should be true. When you're ordering your meal at the restaurant and it didn't come out quite the way that you had ordered it to be, this should be true. When things don't go the way that you had planned for them to go, this should be true. Because whatever you do or say, he says, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. Seems simple, doesn't it? No, not really. It's actually one of the most challenging things when you really think about it. He boils it down to this particular piece. Whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. It's really, interesting when you think about that, and then you go back to the question, right? What would it mean for us to live as though Christ is all that matters? What would it mean for you in your life if you chose to listen to what Paul says in Colossians 3 and say, I'm going to try through the power of Jesus in me, because that's what he said, right? Christ is all that matters, and he lives in all of us. And the same power that rose Jesus from the dead is the same power that lives within us. It's actually part of one of the songs we see. It's one of the songs that we sing. It's one of the promises that we see in Scripture. And so if that's true, then you know what? Guess what? I am completely empowered, enabled, and equipped to live the life that he is calling me to live. I actually am able to live my life as though Christ is all that matters, just simply because he lives in me. So what does it look like? What does it look like? And that's what I want to finish this series with, and it looks like this. When Christ is all that matters, the clothes you wear matter. And I don't mean clothing like, you should or shouldn't wear, shorts, or you should or shouldn't wear a suit or a tie, or you should or shouldn't wear, jeans or khakis or, whatever. I mean, we're not the fashion police. That's not what we are. But it's the very description that Paul gives us. He says, listen, if you will clothe yourself with these things, then it will begin to make a huge impact on the people that you encounter in such a way that I believe that you, even though you may not be the most attractive person, just kidding, but I believe that as we live this life that Jesus has called us to live, that we become attractive to the people around us in a different way. Not from an outward appearance, but because we are dealing with this inwardly and we're different. And so he tells us, starts off with 5 things. Here are the 5 things. Ready? The first one is tenderhearted mercy, which seems like an interesting way to say it, but the word really is compassion. And what he means by this, and this gets kind of weird in the way that you describe it, but it's this feeling that comes deep from your bowels. And I know that we kind of look at that and we think, well, that's really, really weird. But hey, those feelings that come deep from the bowels, those feelings they're deep and they're passionate. That's what he's talking about. Like, this makes a big deal. And what it means for us and how we interact with other people is that, you see, Jesus didn't come, and he doesn't want us to be this way either, in the way that we would interact with other people and we would look at them and we would bring judgment. But yet that's what the church has done for a long time. We see the way that other people are choosing to live their life, and instead of having compassion, instead of having tenderhearted mercy for them in terms of something that comes deep and causes us to actually have feelings towards them and feeling sorry that maybe this happened to them or this was a decision that they made, but yet we get to this place where instead of feeling that way, we just bring judgment. Like, yeah, you know what? I told you so. I told you, I knew that this would happen if you did this. Or even worse is we would bring condemnation. We would get to this place to where we would not just condemn them, but we would condemn them in such a way that they would feel about this big. And what Paul is encouraging us and how he is encouraging us to live is to go, no, there's a different way for you to live. And here's one of the things that comes out of the tenderhearted mercy piece. Ready? The bowels were regarded as the seat of the more violent passions, such as anger and love. But by the Hebrews, it was the seat of tender affections, especially kindness, benevolence, and compassion. A heart in which mercy were to reside. And really, the way that I see this, playing out in our lives is this becomes our first response. Instead of judgment and instead of condemnation, we are responding with compassion and mercy, because that's what we're called to do. Second one, kindness. This word kindness, it means, there's two ways to look at it. One is it means moral goodness. But the other way that you can look at it is the word integrity. And what it battles against in this old way of life, if you remember from last week, one of the things that Paul said is he said, do not lie to one another. And what he meant by do not lie to one another is that you and I would stop pretending, that we would learn to be authentic, and we would learn to be real with the people around us, and we would admit our struggles and our shortcomings and our failings, and we wouldn't try to hide that. But it also means that the way that we talk lines up with how we live our life. These two things are aligning themselves together in such a way that we are living, right, with integrity. People hear us, and they know us, and they know that that's the same. So we're not lying to one another. We're not putting on a mask. We're not pretending to be something that we're not. We're just simply living with integrity, with kindness. That's that word. Humility is the third one. Humility is one of those words that Paul talks about often. He mentions it in Philippians chapter 2 when he talks about how you should consider others before yourself. He talks about it in Romans chapter 12, 13, and 14, where he talks about how you should live in the context of relationship with other people, and that you should give preference to one another in honor. That's how he describes it. And really, one of the ways that I've defined humility, I read this years ago, not sure where it came from, but it just simply means this, that you would think of yourself less. You see, so often we think that humility means that we should think less of ourselves. But it's actually just the truth that we are thinking of ourselves less often, less frequently, which means we are thinking of the other person first and primary, especially when it comes to living in community with other people, so that you would choose to live this way. I have this picture in my mind. I've had it for years just about the church. And what would humility look like? And to me, it's like this. If there were 10 of us or 12 of us that were walking up to a door, every one of us would try to open the door for the other person to the point that nobody would ever want to be the first one to walk through the door. And it's kind of this weird picture, and I don't know where I came up with it, but it just seems like that's what humility is. And you know what's interesting about that is there's something that happens in life when someone opens the door for you. Have you noticed that? You go to a gas station, and I don't know what's going on in your life, but there's just something about somebody taking the time to say, you know what, I'm going to open this door. Would you please just go in front of me? And I know they don't say it that way, but that's what they mean. Or they push the door, they're coming out and you're going in, and they take the time to say, you know what, I want to let you go in the door. That's humility. And there's something that happens that totally disarms us, doesn't it? Whatever we may be feeling, whatever we might be going through at that point, that one act, that simple act of opening the door for someone else completely disarms how we may be feeling at that moment. It's huge. And it's really, really important that we would choose to live our life this way. It's important in our marriages. It's important in our families. It's important as we live in community with one another, that we would get to this place where we are thinking of ourselves less, which means we're thinking of others. Humility. Next word is gentleness. Gentleness is very similar to that word meekness. If you remember in the scriptures, and it's one of the ways that Jesus is described as he's meek. And really the definition of meekness is power under control. That you, even though you might be powerful, and Jesus was powerful, he held that completely under control. But it also reminds me of this word. So last year we listened to this book called The Road Back to You by Ian Morgan Cron. And he's talking about personality types and the stuff like that. But he uses this word in one of them, and it's very fascinating. I had to go look it up because my vocabulary is not that good. But the word is equanimity. Have you ever heard of that word? Some of you are like, yes, I know that word, and here's the definition of it. Well, I didn't. And he talked about it in this context, but it has everything to do with gentleness. And equanimity is this. Equanimity is mental or emotional stability, or here's a better word, composure, especially under tension or strain. Mental or emotional stability or composure, especially under tension or strain. And here's why I love that word. How often in your life do things not go exactly the way you think they should? Yeah, that's how I feel. And learning to live, I'm a very loud, passionate person. I don't know if you've learned that about me in this time that we've been together. That's kind of who I am. And so gentleness is not necessarily something that, especially early on in ministry, that would have described me. But I was really challenged this year with that idea of gentleness or the word equanimity as I was going through that book, and that I would learn to have, especially that idea of mental and emotional stability and composure, especially under tension or strain. So that because I was one that I could walk into a meeting, if things didn't go my way, I would get, loud and upset. And I still do today because I'm not perfect. But equanimity reminds me, sometimes I sit in meetings and I have to go, just equanimity. You just breathe. And I'll give you the example from first service. So first service, our projectors went out again. And that's the third time in 4 weeks that something's happened during the service that they went out. And our team did an incredible job of getting them back up. They were only out for part of a song or whatever, and those types of things. But it's really easy in those moments to panic. And in your panic, you miss out on gentleness and equanimity. And so you are no longer composed, and you lose it. And I don't know if you've ever lost it, but it's not fun to try to recover from it. So gentleness is incredibly important for every one of us. And then the last one, which is so challenging today, isn't it? I mean, do we even want to say the word? I don't know that I want to say the word again, but third time, patience. Here it is. We live in a culture not built for patience. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know about you, but one of the things that I'm loving right now is being able to order food from an app and then walk in the store and not have to wait in the line. Can I get an amen on this? I mean, this is one of the most beautiful things. I mean, you got a family of 7, and it's like, I can order everybody's meal, and then I can just walk in, and they've got it sitting right there for me. I didn't have to wait in line for it. I didn't have to wait behind the other family. I was really rude. I just cut in line. I jumped the line, and I just picked up my food, and I left. It's amazing. It's awesome. In patience, though. Right? It's the same thing with Amazon, isn't it? How many of you order stuff from Amazon on a regular basis? Come on, little therapy. You guys are all a bunch of liars, I think. But, Amazon, you can order stuff on Amazon, and it'll be here in 2 days. And we get really stoked when that one item comes up, and it's like, this is 1-day shipping. I will have this tomorrow. You live in some places, it's same day. It's like it will be at your doorstep when you get home from work. It's a beautiful thing. But if you don't even want to wait for 2 days shipping anymore, you can get on the Target app or the Walmart app or the Best Buy app, and you can order it. You can pay for it. You can even go to the store. You can sit in your car in the parking lot. Let them know that you are there, and they will deliver it to your car. We grocery shop that way. I don't know if you figured that out, but, once a week, my wife's like, hey, can we swing by Walmart so they can throw our groceries in the back for us? I'm like, let's do it. What does that speak to? Impatience. No, it's not laziness. That's not the word, Dolores. You missed it. Patience. That's the word. Patience. Patience. And then really what it means for us is how How do we become patient with one another? That's what he's calling us to do. Next couple of things real quick. When Christ is all that matters, the way you treat others matters. You treat others the way Christ treats you. You treat others the way Christ treats you. Remember how he said in this text, he talked about you are to forgive one another just as Christ forgave you. You see, that's what he's talking about. That you are learning to treat other people the same way that Christ treated you. And oh, what a difference it makes when you look at someone else and you remember that God treated you with grace, that God extended you mercy, that he was compassionate towards you, that he was loving towards you, that even he moved towards you. When you were a mess and you were making a mess of things, there it is. You treat others, you are making the choice. I'm going to forgive them. I'm going to make allowances for one another's faults because there's not one of us that's perfect. So I'm going to treat them the way that Christ has treated me. Next thing. When Christ is all that matters, loving people matters. Loving people matters. It's the second thing that he tells us is the most important things. First one, love God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second command is like unto it, that you would love your neighbor as yourself. He talked to us. He said in this text, he says, listen, if you will, the last thing, if you will clothe yourselves with love, it will be the thing that bonds you together in perfect harmony. And it's a beautiful picture of what it looks like when the church makes a decision to say, I'm going to choose to respond in love. That's going to be my first response. It's not going to be my last response. It's not going to be my second response. No, I'm going to respond, and the question might be something like this. What would love, require of me? In this moment, in this conversation, in the context of this relationship, if loving people matters, what does that love require of me in this moment? Because at the end of the day, here's what it finally looks like. To live a life that matters, which I'm pretty sure that most of us want to live a life that matters. We want to live a life that has meaning and purpose. Then you need to live as though Christ is all that matters. You want to know why? Because he is. And not only is he all that matters, but he made a choice that he will take up residence in your life. And he will empower and enable and equip you to do all of the things that you see in this particular text. And it's just us making this decision. 2020, it's the third Sunday of the year. What would it look like if all of us in this church, one church, made a decision to say, you know what? I'm going to choose to live my life this year, this day, this week, this month, as though Christ is all that matters, because I know he is. I'm pretty sure that we would make a huge impact in our community, in our places of business, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, if we decided to live life the way that Paul talks about in Colossians 3. So you up for it? I think it sounds good for us. So would you stand? Hey, we're going to close our service. And as we do, our prayer team is going to be in the back corners. And they're here to pray with you and for you and over you and whatever it is that you might be facing in your life or going through. Hey, we're seeing God do some incredible things in our midst. So I'm going to pray, and we're going to sing this song together as we close our time. Father, thank you for being patient with us. We're a mess. Every one of us in this room. Our hearts are a mess, and we've made a mess of our lives and relationships in the past, and some of us got angry and mad this morning, and we're a mess. Thank you that you're with us, though, that you don't leave us or forsake us or give up on us. I pray that through the power of Jesus living in us, God, that you would enable, empower, and equip us to live the way that you've told us about in Colossians 3. And that through our lives, that you would make an appeal into the lives of other people. And we might see them come to faith in Jesus because you're good and kind and gracious. Thank you.